Let's do this. Let's begin with a question. What do you do when the strong person in your life all of a sudden becomes weak? Right? Children face this when a parent whom they've relied on for everything suddenly is struck down with illness or grief, or maybe you're a coworker and your colleague, you're working together on a project, and the leader of your group suddenly wavers and just isn't that strong leader anymore. This is what the disciples were facing the last night of Jesus' life. After the Passover supper, everything goes downhill quickly for Jesus. If you remember, we're working our way through the Gospel of Mark, who we've been in Mark for a year. Can you believe it? I can't believe it. But we've been in Mark for a year, and the first part of the book, it's 16 chapters. Mark chapters 1 through 8, Jesus is saying, Mark is writing immediately a lot. Immediately, Jesus is doing this and doing this. Everything's happening fast, and the disciples immediately go and do this, and immediately. And then the last part of the book, and specifically this part we're in right here, Mark slows way down, and we're not jumping a lot. I mean, especially Mark chapter 14, he's literally going to give us the 4 watches of the night. So the night was broken up back then into 4 watches. And 2 weeks ago, we looked at the first watch of the night. From 6 to 9 p.m. is when they celebrated the Passover. And then the Lord's Supper came from that. So we looked at that 2 weeks ago. And we're going to look at tonight is the second watch of the night. 9 to midnight. This is Jesus in the garden. This is the Judas coming with a kiss, the betrayal. And then the third watch of the night was the trial with the religious leaders, and the rooster crows and Peter weeps. And then the fourth watch of the night is 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. is when Jesus and Pilate have their conversation. So Mark slows way down, and he's crawling along, giving us details. And all of these watches, though, all 4 of them, Jesus remains faithful. He remains, while everyone else is unfaithful. The disciples are deserters. The religious leaders. I mean, who has a meeting at 1 a.m.? What? That's the religious leaders do that. Pilate, earlier dawn has this. They're desperately trying to save their own skin. They're trying to hold on to whatever power they have, but in so doing, they're going to lose their positions, their temple, their city, everything. So let's begin by reading Jesus' prophecy about what will happen. This, again, is right after the Lord's Supper, the night of Passover, Mark 14:27. If you got your Bibles, you can turn them on, you can open them up, you can look at the screen. We'll start in verse 27. You will all fall away, Jesus told them, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Peter declared, even if all fall away, I will not. Truly I tell you, Jesus answered, today, even tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. But Peter insisted emphatically, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the others said the same. So Jesus says his disciples will become deserters. And Peter, in the Greek, it really stands out, but it's almost like Peter saying, listen, Jesus, you're right about everybody else, but you're wrong about me. Yeah, everybody else will desert you, but I will die for you. I will die with you. Peter's great pride leads to his great fall. And we're just gonna we're gonna read the next part, and then I'm gonna comment, and we're just gonna go through this like that. So, verse 32. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Now again, up until this point, in Mark's gospel, Jesus remains unflappable. I mean, he has the power, he has the presence, he can calm storms with a word, right? Like he can cast demons out of people. He's never afraid. I mean, he's steady. He's all of it. But right here, I mean, with Peter, James, and John, he says, I mean, he appears terrified. Shaking maybe. I mean, just really, really scared. And he says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." In the Greek, it could be translated to be overcome with horror is what we're getting at here. Jesus senses something, sees something, realizes something, and it stuns him. It's strange, isn't it, that we as Christians, we have many, many, many accounts of Christian men and women, ordinary people, facing torture, death, being burned at the stake, being cut in pieces. And they appear to face death better than Jesus did. Isn't that interesting? We have accounts. Take Polycarp, an old man. We know this from Christian history. He was the bishop of Smyrna, an early church leader. Near the end of his life, he was taken to the magistrate and told that he would be burned at the stake. And the magistrate said to this old man, I'll give you another chance to recant your faith, avoid this unnecessary execution. And this is Polycarp's reply. This was written down. "The fire you threaten burns but an hour and is quenched after a little. You do not know the fire of coming judgment. But why do you delay? Come, do what you will." I mean, he's just, this old guy is just like, why do you keep stalling? Come on, light the fire. Or take Nicholas Ridley and Hugh Latimer, who were burned at the stake for their faith in Oxford, England in 1555. They were tied side by side, and when the fire was lit at their feet, Latimer said, "Be of good cheer, Master Ridley, and play the man. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England as I trust shall never be put out." And they died by burning. So why is it that these men could face their death braver than Jesus? Well, we must say that Jesus must not have been facing something that Polycarp and Ridley and Latimer and any other martyr faced. Something happened that night in the garden. Jesus saw, felt, sensed something that shocked the unshockable God. What was it? He was facing something beyond physical torment. This goes beyond the fear of the Roman whip or the piercings. Death itself, that's like mere bug bites compared to this. That's nothing. He was smothered by a mere whiff of what he would go through on the cross. Didn't he know he was going to die? Yes, he'd been saying for chapters that he's going to go to Jerusalem, be handed over to the chief priests. They're going to kill him. I mean, this is what he's been saying. So So what was it? Well, he was beginning to taste what he was going to experience on the cross. And it's at the very heart of his prayer in this next line here, verse 35. Going a little further, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. Verse 36. Abba, Father, he said, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will. So in the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, the cup, that cup is an image, it's a metaphor for the wrath of God upon human evil. It's an image of divine justice being poured out like a cup. Out on injustice. Ezekiel talks about it. Isaiah talks about it. Our prophets speak about it. You see, Jesus' entire life, he had union with God the Father, the Spirit. He constantly felt them. He was with them. He prayed to them, with them. And at the baptism and at the transfiguration, the veil gets kind of pulled away, and we get glimpses of a voice from heaven. Like we get to hear that, or the shining, like Jesus shines on top of that mountain. We get to see that. We get to see the fellowship that they had. Always. Always. Forever. Always was type of thing. But in the garden, Jesus turns to God in prayer and finds nothing. Finds the great silence, the abyss, the dark chasm, just emptiness. It's the cup. God is the source of all love, all life, all order, all light. Therefore, exclusion from God is exclusion from all love, all light, all life, all order. Jesus right here in the garden is experiencing infinite disintegration, separation from the Father for the first time ever. Ever. Imagine, remember when you're a parent and that first time you leave that baby. And what's the baby do? I mean, when it realizes it, maybe one or two, mom's not there, dad's not there, what do? They scream bloody murder. Jesus is feeling a little like that. It's the tremor in the Trinity. For the first time in the history of the universe, he began to taste a foretaste of the cross. And he staggers at this. Verse 37. Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Simon, he said to Peter, are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit, listen to Jesus' words, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Note that Jesus calls Peter Simon. So in chapter 3 of Mark, he gives him that nickname. His name is Simon, but his nickname is the Rock, Peter. And he calls him that from chapter 3 on until right here, chapter 14. Because Peter's not acting like a rock. So he calls him his old name, Simon. Let's keep going. Verse 39. Once more he went away and prayed the same thing. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Jesus wants them to keep watch. But what does that mean? Keep watch. Well, it means keep awake, means to identify with Jesus, remain loyal to Jesus, follow the instructions, and to follow him on the road to the cross. In the garden, the disciples had a choice to express loyalty to Jesus by remaining physically awake. And this is going around midnight. Hours of praying. Could you do that? Hours? You don't know why? Just remain with me. Pray. Being with Jesus the hour he needed them the most. They were supposed to submit to God's will as Jesus does. They were to gain spiritual strength that would overpower their weak flesh. If the disciples were loyal, they would keep their eyes open, seeing beyond the suffering to the coming of God's powerful reign. Let's keep reading. Verse 41. Returning the third time, he said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough. The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." Jesus knows that the hour of his passion, Jesus knows that the hour of his passion might be removed. He knows that God may take this cup away, that God can remove the cup, but Jesus discerns that God has chosen for him to drink the cup and to experience the hour of suffering. God is working his divine purposes. God's kingdom is being established. If it must be by way of a violent, gruesome death, Jesus is ready. He is willing. The disciples, though, have slept through all this. They're not ready. When the hour comes, when the trial comes, when the testing comes, they're not ready. What does Mark say? Their eyes were heavy. They could not see beyond the fear. They could not see beyond the enemy's swords. Verse 43. Just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared with him with a crowd armed with swords and clubs sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. Again, this is when the inversion really starts, right? When a kiss becomes betrayal, everything's upside down now. Everything is not the way it should be. If we think back to 2 weeks ago, when we were talking about that first watch of the night, right? The Passover. Jesus is with his disciples celebrating Passover, and that first Passover night in Exodus, right? If you remember, you were supposed to slay a lamb, spill the blood, put it on the doorposts, right? And then the death would pass over you. And in the book of Exodus, we know that happens. Death comes for anyone who did not do that right at midnight. Right at midnight, that happens. And right here, right at midnight, Judas comes. Jesus is shackled. And right at midnight, any good Jew who was participating in Passover, they would stay up until midnight. And then they would all go outside, and they would they would look around, and they trusted God, and they wanted the Messiah to come. And so imagine everyone saying the same words every year for centuries, and especially this night, they would look out and they would say, "Maybe next year." And then they would go to bed. And right at midnight, as Jesus is handcuffed, They say in vain, maybe next year. And Jesus says, no. He has discerned, this is the year. This is the time. This is the hour of my fulfillment. Let's read verse 46. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of his high priest, cutting off his ear. Am I leading a rebellion, said Jesus, that you've come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me, but the scriptures must be fulfilled. Then everyone deserted him and fled. So Jesus is in the garden being arrested at midnight. Soldiers come with swords and clubs to arrest a pacifist. Again, everything is upside down. Everything. Well, they didn't need swords and clubs. This is Jesus. What? He's not running. He's not hiding. He's not fighting back. He's faithful. He's ready. And what do we see the disciples doing? They're running. They're hiding. Even worse, let's read the last two verses here. Verse 51. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment, so his PJs, I guess, was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. Now, this is interesting. Why? You just have to, why would Mark write this? Like why? What? You got to think about. And scholars think about who is this? And we're guessing here, but what if this is Mark? What if this is Mark kind of leaving his stamp saying, hey, I was there too. It was crazy that night. It was crazy. And again, if he could have just said, and they all deserted him, but he wanted it to sink in. How deeply. He wanted to convey what happened. That they were so afraid that they ran naked in the garden. And that reminds me, when have we had humans beings in a garden naked and afraid? Oh, yeah. Page 3 of the Bible. We see Adam and Eve talking to the snake and buying the lie, not trusting God, not trusting what God did or said. And what do we see them doing? Running, hiding, naked and afraid. And what do we see Jesus doing? Not that at all. He's trusting God in the silence. He's trusting the Father. Gosh, he did what we never do in the silence. He remains faithful and true and obedient to God. Come what may. He's not afraid. Man. I want to land the plane and finish with a strand that we didn't really pull on, something that I didn't really notice. Maybe you noticed it, but did you catch the title that Jesus gives God in his prayer? He says, Abba, Father. Abba, literally means daddy. It's the only time in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that he says this title. And again, I think Mark is an amazing writer, and I think he wants us to connect with a story from the book of Genesis. It's a disturbing story. It's a story in Genesis 22. See, so God told Abraham, look at the stars in the sky. So will your descendants be. And he's old. Him and Sarah are old, 100 years old, still nothing, no descendants. He's trusting God, and then God gives him Isaac. And when Isaac's maybe a teenager, God says, go to this mountain and sacrifice your one and only son, your beloved son. Abraham takes Isaac. Isaac is carrying the wood. And Isaac literally says, Abba, Daddy, I've got the wood for the sacrifice. Where's the sacrifice, though? And Abraham says, God will provide the sacrifice, son. Let's keep going. They go up the mountain. He binds his son. But he's obedient. Abraham raises the knife. And then God says, Abraham, no, don't. And then they look, and there's a ram. And they sacrifice the ram. But here, in Jesus' prayer, he discerns that this time he's the lamb. There's no substitute. He's the substitute for us. And just like Isaac carrying the wood, Jesus has to carry the wood. Isaac didn't know what was going on. Jesus knew exactly what was going on. In a great sermon entitled Christ's Agony, Jonathan Edwards, that great preacher, says this. I just listened to this. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus had then a near view of the furnace of wrath into which he would be cast. He was brought to the mouth of the furnace, and he might look into it and stand in view of its raging flames and see the glowing of its heat, that he might know where he was going and what he was about to suffer. There are two things that render Christ's love wonderful. Number one, that he should be willing to endure suffering so great. And number two, that he should be willing to endure them to make atonement for wickedness so great. But in order to its being properly said, Christ of his own act and choice endured suffering that was so great, it was necessary that he should have to have an extraordinary sense how great these sufferings were to be before he endured them. Do you see? Do you see? He actually got a taste of the cross before the cross. And he still did it, friends. He still did it. For you and for me. That's the love. That's the great love that you've been looking for your entire life. There is no family love that will help that. There's no spouse love, no friend love. That love changes lives. It does. It's the only thing. To know that at the cross wasn't the only time he tasted that. He tasted it here, and he still did it for you. Oh. And so I must end by inviting you to stop and ponder. If you were like Mark and you wrote yourself into this part of the story, where would you be? Would you be like Peter? Full of bluster one minute and asleep the next. And confused and full of shame the next. Or maybe like Judas, if we're honest, ready to betray Jesus if it doesn't suit our needs, our plans, our expectations for how we think our life should go? Or are we prepared to keep watch with him in the garden, sharing his anguish in prayer? I believe the church is called to live right here amidst the confusion, false loyalty, direct attacks, traitor kisses. Those who name the name of Christ must stay in the garden with him until the Father's will is done. God help us. Let me pray. Oh, Jesus, as we just ponder your passion for a little bit, God, I pray that we would be in awe of you, what you did, what you overcame, the fear that we face every day, you felt, the temptation you felt, or that we lose to every day, you felt, but you went the distance, God. You became that lamb for us. You are amazing. And God, thank you that you meet us right where we're at, in our failings, in our betrayal. That's where you meet us. That's where you remind us of your love, of your grace, of your mercy, of your power. We thank you. We praise you. And now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever and ever. Amen. God bless you all. We'll see you next week.